are talking Dead Silence. This is a 2007 movie directed by James Wan. Yes, he of The Conjuring fame. And he kind of did this before The Conjuring movies. He had done Saw prior to this, but you know, this was kind of before I would say he was a kind of more of a household name in regards to the kind of the horror community. James Wan clearly has a fascination with dolls because they appear in many of his movies. Obviously, you had the kind of the doll in the Conjuring movies. Obviously, there was a doll in Saw, and there's a doll in this. So clearly, he has some type of childhood issues with scary-looking dolls. But there you go. So he co-wrote this with Lee Whannell, who has also come on to be quite a kind of a name in kind of like you know, horror films and genre films. And this one stars Ryan Kwanten, who you may know as one of the characters from the True Blood TV series. Now, I hadn't actually seen this film before watching it for this kind of review. You know, as I said, I'm actually quite a fan of the Conjuring movies, and James Wan certainly has a style that I think is present in all of his movies, right up to kind of Malignant, which is kind of his more recent one. You still have that kind of a James Wan feel to it. Now, as I mentioned, I hadn't seen Dead Silence before. I don't really know why, I just never kind of got around to it. So what is the story? Well, it focuses on this couple initially, and they get a knock on the door and there's a package left outside for them, which appears to be this handmade ventriloquist doll. And it's, you know, it's a little bit kind of spooky looking and they don't really know why it's there. And later on that evening, the guy's wife, she's killed. And she has a terrifying kind of look at her face, her tongue's been ripped out. And then Kwanten's character, it goes back to his kind of ancestral home where there's this kind of, this curse of this kind of, this woman who had died some years before. And, you know, everyone won't say the name of Mary Shaw now, this kind of woman who died under mysterious circumstances who had this kind of, this doll. And obviously we uncover this supernatural mystery behind it all the time. He's kind of under suspicion for the murder of his wife from the police, played by Donnie Wahlberg as kind of like the lead detective. What will happen? You'll have to watch the movie and find out. So let's talk about what I think worked in this movie. If you like gothic horror imagery, then this movie is going to please you, because oh my god, there is so much kind of like gothic kind of horror imagery in this movie. You won't know where to look. I mean, it's so arguably over stylized at a point, and I'm gonna come back onto that, but nonetheless it really does look suitably scary in practically every frame. You know, pretty much every kind of sequence within the movie is dripping with, you know, creepy kind of locations, dry ice, spooky lighting. You know, it never really lets up. And when we go to this kind of this town where, you know, he goes and sees his father and stuff, it's all kind of like very kind of down kind of graded, and everything's kind of, all the businesses have shut up. There's been lots of murders there. It's really looking kind of very run down, and you know, it really feels like a very oppressive force has, you know, has applied itself to this kind of particular kind of area. And obviously as the film progresses, we'll find out why that is. The movie does have some very, very effective kind of spooky moments and kind of jump scares. Now this, I think, is where James Wan really succeeds. I mean, some people may not like his style. I have seen some critiques. I actually quite enjoy James Wan films, although this is not as good as his later films, I would say. But nonetheless, there is some really creepy moments, some really kind of well set up kind of jump scares, and some fantastic imagery on display here. I mean, my God, this movie is certainly one of the most overt kind of movies in regards to, you know, having these kind of scary kind of sequences and images that kind of on screen, and spooky, you know, spooky characters, all these kind of like these dolls and stuff, which we play a good part. It's fantastically creepy. And there are, you know, there are a couple of decent scares in there as well. The movie, because I think it's so jam-packed with so many scares, it actually is a quite well-paced film. So you're never really going too long without kind of something kind of happening. In actual fact, it almost feels it's a little bit truncated to a certain degree. Sometimes you feel there could have been a little bit more added, but it has certainly helped with the pace, because I do feel it kind of rattles along at a fair old speed. And the production design here, I've got to say, is absolutely fantastic, as they tend to be. And let's remember, this was really before James Wan hit his kind of stride. Obviously, he had Saw in the bag, which was, made for kind of like, chains behind the sofa, really. But this one, still a relatively kind of, a meager budget movie. It wasn't a particularly big financial success, which is why we've never really had a sequel for it. But nonetheless, I do think it does boast some kind of great kind of production design here. And and the acting, I think, is also fairly good with the cast as well. What doesn't work here, one of the things that struck me as bizarre with this movie is there's virtually no characterization. We get straight into it. I mean, this kind of goes back to what I was saying with the pacing. Yes, the pacing is very kind of quick, and it doesn't take long before it gets going. But it comes at the cost of, I think, characterization, because we get our first kind of scare within minutes of starting this movie. And it's not like a pre-scare where you have, someone completely unrelated to the plot that they kind of, show you what's going to go on. This is all to do with the kind of the main plot. But I think our characters really kind of suffer from any real depth and kind of characterization, unfortunately. And again, this is why I'm saying I do think this may have benefited from having a little bit more balance maybe in its kind of storytelling, because it's lots of kind of like on-screen scary stuff, but it's done with characters who we don't really feel like we've gotten to know, and have no real kind of like arc or kind of like character moments and things like that. So it feels a little bit empty and shallow at the same time. I also have to say some of the characters here are just not particularly kind of well written or realistic. So we take our police character, for example, played by Donnie Wahlberg. I mean, he just seems so unlike any type of realistic police procedure that he would be following. It's kind of like, is he really a policeman? I mean, he just seems to go completely kind of rogue without really any type of following any proper kind of procedures and things like this. And like, again, he's written quite poorly just because this is what the script kind of needs him to do. So there's that. I have to say as well, and I've mentioned how the kind of good the production design is here. I have to be honest with you, and this I've seen a lot of people praise this. I did have a look at a couple of reviews prior to recording this, but a lot of people praise the how kind of overt the horror elements are here. I have to say I think it's a little bit too much. I mean, it's not a gory film, don't get me wrong, but it just seems to me it's overproduced. It's like a kind of, if you listen to a band and they make a record which has too much production on it, it's very slick, but it kind of feels like you've lost the heart of what makes it kind of special. And to me, like, as I've said, every kind of sequence seems to have a very kind of like overly produced sheen to it. Lots of kind of dry ice. It's kind of like these kind of almost Tim Burton-esque kind of style houses in this kind of like this dark area. We go into these kind of like these buildings and they're completely dilapidated and kind of falling down with no light. No one ever kind of switches a kind of a light, things like this. It's just a little bit kind of like goes a little bit too far into be over designed. Now, I've reviewed some movies, in particular there's a director called Perry Reginald Teo, who is clearly influenced by James Wan because he has a very similar style, albeit in a lower budget kind of manner. And I have to be honest with you, even though this is a James Wan film, this feels like it's more of a B-movie homage to James Wan rather than kind of James Wan. As I've said, I think this is because it's an earlier film. If you look at movies like the kind of the Conjuring films, and even movies like Insidious, I think he's dialed back a little bit and learned how to kind of not show all his hand first of all, which I think maybe is some of the issue I have with this one. It just feels a little bit too much at times in regards to its very, very overt horror elements, but then doesn't feel realistic because of it, because it feels too over stylized. And you couple this with, I think, very kind of weak characterization. And although it's a very kind of like visually flashy movie and well produced, and it's not badly acted, it feels kind of like quite shallow at the end of the day. It's certainly not a bad film, and I think if you're undemanding, you can kind of enjoy this. But you know, a lot of people give this real high marks, and you know, I've got to be honest with you. Although I enjoyed the film, when you look at it with more critical eyes, I think, you know, it's lacking a little bit in certain kind of areas, lacking certainly in structure and kind of maybe the script. Now I understand that Lee Whannell wasn't happy with the finished product. So, you know, obviously we're looking at maybe some studio kind of like interference there. But the movie as it stands, it's still an enjoyable film. If you like, you know, very kind of well produced, slickly made films, then check it out. But, you know, like I've said, it's kind of it goes a little bit too far in that direction. But I will give it a 6 out of 10. Have you seen it? What did you think of it? Leave me a comment and I'll look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.